Dr. Braaten, you've been a longtime friend to the field of emotional behavior disorders, and I'm really curious, how did you get into the field in the first place?
Well, it was an accident. I had a position at a residential facility. My career goal was clinical child psych,
Right.
but I found out that educators didn't work holidays and weekends and rotating shifts. And
Seems a logical reason to go into education.
well, and there was a position that was offered to me in the Minneapolis Public Schools. I was not trained as a teacher, knew nothing about teachers, but ended up in the classroom, and that was when I was told I needed to go to the University of Minnesota and meet this guy named Frank Wood. And so I think a big part of it has to do with the mentoring and encouragement that Frank provided to me in those early years. But it was an accident. That's how it happened. And I think Frank gets a lot of credit for encouraging me and mentoring me when I didn't even know what I was going to do.
Well, it has led to a really distinguished career. I wanted to congratulate you on being the 2013 Howard Muscott CCBD Distinguished Service Award winner. And with that, I would really like to know, to kind of describe the arc of your career. What was your career like in the field?
The easiest thing to say is it was completely unplanned.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing happened that I intended, really. As I said, I got into school by accident. Within a year and a half, I started in administration, which was by accident. But I really discovered that it became important to me in the first year I was in a classroom when I realized I had no clue how to teach reading.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very dependent on that I was going to, and the principal of the school told me they would take me 10 years. And I thought, well, that won't take me 10 years. So I decided that I was going to learn how to do this thing, and obviously I had to start at the university. So I two things. One was I pursued, was essentially, I think I'm 3 credits shy of a specialist in reading. And very nearly went for my doctorate in reading instead of special ed. And I just thought it was such an important thing to do. But when I finally figured out, or thought I knew how to teach reading, they decided they needed an administrator and tapped me for that. I had no desire to be an administrator, but I did that as a temporary thing for a year. And then I thought, well, that was the end of that. But then they opened up a new school, and they said, well, we need an administrator for the secondary school. And they asked me first to do that, and I said, no, thank you. I liked the smaller kids that were a little less dangerous at the time. And then they asked me a second time, to which I replied similarly, no, I didn't think so. And then the third time they said, you're not being asked, you will do this. And so I got into adolescence. And that meant I had to pursue a principal's license. So at that moment in time, I had a position which required 3 licenses that I did not have.
So people keep throwing down gauntlets to you, and you
Yes.
keep stepping
That's
up.
kind of what happened, yes.
Yeah.
I got into education unintentionally, got into administration unintentionally, got into adolescence unintentionally, and...
But I believe it was quite intentional that you got the award.
But, so in every case, the things that happen to me are always, as I think backwards, better than what I had planned for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I could have planned things to work out as well as they did.
Well, you are a great friend to the field, there is no doubt. What events, policies, innovations, and people have had the most influence on your professional career? I know you mentioned Frank Wood. Have there been others?
Well, in addition to Frank, certainly he's at the head of it. Eleanor Getzlow is another person in the field who was and continues to be a very dear friend and a mentor, and I think a family friend. So the relationship with Eleanor goes back a very long time. Obviously, my wife, who basically told me that it would be okay to do things that I didn't think I should be doing. Deciding to start a conference with no money and stuff like that, and helping me out. But took some risks with me and has stood by me over the years. But there are so many, it seems like to mention one would be, who are you going to lead out? Because I think Well, CCBD has been my family
Okay.
professionally. Events, hard to say. Certainly 94 142.
Yes.
And
Did you participate in the Frank Wood series of workshops that he
I did. In fact, I was in all of them. And I suppose that's another example of an event and an example of Frank. He asked me, and I think it might have even been the first of that series, to do a keynote presentation. And I said, I had no image of myself as a keynote speaker in, what was that, 77 or 78, somewhere back then. And he said, no, you'll be fine. You'll do that. Which, of course, is where I met nearly everyone who you have archived in your system who was around at that time. Yes, and that was a wonderful model, I think, what Frank had, we're talking about redoing that model.
Oh, I think that would be absolutely fabulous.
Where you bring together 3 or 4 people around an important topic and invite a group. It was a terrific experience in terms of having a chance to meet the leading writers, thinkers, researchers, and spend a couple of days with them just talking in a small group. It was an exceptionally good experience for me at my age, and it would be now at my age too. But yes, I did get to do all of that.
I think that would be just a wonderful thing to bring that model back again.
Yeah.
What has had the greatest negative, I'm sorry, what's had the greatest positive impact on the field itself?
That's a tough call. Following 94 142, I'm going to say that the one that's had probably the longest, and maybe the most, was going to be the PBIS movement. Because it's taken
That would be positive behavioral
positive
support.
behavior support system, which was actually, now we've got well over a decade of data on that. And it's really the only one the feds have continued to support for more than a decade. So you have early intervention, which is clearly needed, it's clearly supported, it's clearly the right thing to do. I think the Safe Schools Act that emerged in all of the violence in the early 90s put a lot of effort into the knowledge base of dealing with aggression and violence in the country. Sadly, there isn't a single dollar of that money left. But what is interesting to me is people still have a perception that kids today are out of control or so aggressive or violent. But when you look at the data, it doesn't support it. Actually, all of the aggressive data on youth today is that they're better behaved now than they've been in 20 years. And the data is very consistent about that. So I like to think that the money that was invested in developing school violence, school safe programs during the 90s maybe worked. Because we certainly don't see it. When I was in the school system in the early 90s, and violence in the United States peaked in 93. This is 2000. That's 20 years ago. And it's progressively improved since. So even though we have the Connecticut tragedy and others, it's not what it was then. And Minneapolis, which is where I was in 93, was called Murderopolis. We had 253 shootings that year. We haven't had anything like that since then. So I think the Safe Schools Act did have some benefit. And there was a lot of resources pumped into trying to learn more about it. And one of the sad things I think you asked me about out of that era was the shift in public policy toward youth that basically went in the direction of seeing public safety as a priority in the juvenile justice system rather than rehabilitation. I think that was a mistake. It took well over a decade for people who began to rethink that all we're going to do is lock up these kids. And we lock up more kids in the United States than any nation on the planet at a cost that exceeds what we would have to spend if we sent them all to Harvard. Those things still trouble me.
That is troubling. What have been some other negative impacts on the field?
Well, this is where I get to say at my age it can be politically incorrect. But I like to think empirically correct. I'm very concerned about the declassification, if you will, decategorization, the homogenization of the whole special needs learners group into one category. That just makes zero sense to me. As you're well aware, I'm just on the recovering side of heart surgery. I want a specialist when I've got a tough case, and I don't want somebody who's generically trained and not even motivated in my particular disability, which the behavioral group needs specialists. And so I would say that would be my biggest troubling issue is the watering down and the homogenization and the minimization of the seriousness of which these kids' problems present. And I'm very concerned that we're nowhere near turning the corner on that one. At least that's my sense.
What would it take to turn the corner?
That's a good question.
In an ideal world, what could we do? Or what should we be doing that we're not?
Well, it's got so many moving parts to it.
Right.
You know, it's one thing to say, well, first of all, the whole idea that getting people through the higher ed system quickly and efficiently, and there's a problem. You know,
Gonna get no argument from us on that.
you know, the whole higher ed process is one which, arguably could be retooled in some way that still produce specialists, but what we're getting instead is, and we have as a country, we are so, sure what the word is. I'm going to say fearful or upset about any kind of labeling,
Mm-hmm.
but because there's a pejorative association with that.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays it doesn't seem to matter. It would be certainly anything that's emotional, behavioral. We've never done well on the mental health side in this society, whether it's children or adolescents. So
Or adults with that.
that's what I meant. Our adult, yeah. So we have a long way to go there. But the absence of a label also, and I like Jim Kaufman's kind of way of characterizing it, suggests that we don't want to label anybody, but to do that would mean we would have parking lots without handicap designated parking spaces.
Mm-hmm.
It makes as much sense as saying, here's a handicap space that's not marked because we don't want any labels. And I think that's the kind of nonsense that we're into.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know a better way to talk about how foolish it is.
I think that's an excellent way of thinking about
Because if you don't have a label, you get no help.
that. Right.
And labels don't have to mean categories of kind of person. It does mean have a way to communicate the sort of resources that are important
Mm-hmm.
to enabling somebody to benefit from help. So I think we have to come to terms with that. How long will that? I'd like to say it's still going to happen in my future. I don't see that because we spent 20 years undoing it the last 20 years. I'm guessing at all of the institutions that were created to support a system of specialization and expertise are being dismantled. How long will it take to rebuild that? That will be a long time coming, I'm afraid.
Do you think it will take a lawsuit of some sort to get that triggered again?
Wouldn't surprise me. It took Park and Mills to get the case in the 70s. And, the whole business now, I'm a big fan of the concept of the RTI, the response to treatment, as a model for doing individual assessment and individual intervention planning. But what I'm learning about now is that RTI is more classroom-based, not student-based.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a movement away from the whole concept of IDEA, from individual to classroom focus, and the RTI model is going that way. I'm worried about that, and people seem to be big advocates of that.
I've seen that even in my son's third grade classroom. There are 3 tiers within that classroom,
Yeah.
and it is pretty much classroom school-wide without any emphasis on what maybe an individual child
Yeah.
might need within
And people think that's the right way to go. I guess I'm old-fashioned. I worry about, we spent a lot of our heroes, leaders, created an idea that was to be an advocate for individuals who are difficult to serve, and I see so much of that being eroded. And the infrastructure that it took years to build being eroded. I'm terribly concerned how long, and it may take a class action lawsuit, and then all we will have to go through. So the great thing about your project is you're preserving an awful lot of that history. Or maybe it won't have to take so long, I don't know.
We'll be calling on our tapes to testify.
I do think another thing that maybe, and I'm hopeful that's happening, not at the pace I would like it to, is the merging of common vision between education, mental health, and juvenile justice.
Mm-hmm.
That has been a very long process. They still like to sit in their silos, but at least the conversations have been going on for a long time, and when we look at the best practices data, best practices in mental health, guess what? The same things that we're talking about as best practices in special ed. So we're sharing a common database about best practice, and juvenile justice is discovering, again, they knew it once, and I think that those things apply there. So I think there's some hope. We're looking at transdisciplinary application of best practices, which is basically what I tried to start in 1982. That was the first conference, was transdisciplinary.
Well, and I think that's, I have heard time and again from various leaders in the field, yourself included, Steve Burness, C. Mike Nelson, that they were trained in that kind of that transdisciplinary approach, and that seems to be more successful when we talk about kids with emotional behavior disorders. So my question to you is, when are you going to pull this conference together? All of the Frank Wood model, and who are you going to invite?
Who am I going to invite?
And if it were up to you to do that, who would you invite?
Oh, it would certainly be representatives of different disciplinary frameworks. To do otherwise would be contrary to what I've spent the last 40 years doing. I can't imagine at this point in my career doing anything that would include representation from the three primary sectors of service. One thing that I might want to, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, I might want to do is an examination of how our higher education system model either gets in the way of or could be refocused to be efficient, but also produce more truly genuine specialists. And I'm kind of intrigued, I can't believe I'm even saying these things, with the medical model. I think that's, okay, we'll produce GPs, if you will, and then there will be tiers of genuine specialists from there, which makes some sense to me. And so I'm actually looking more at medicine as a framework for a direction than anything we've done in education for doing that.
Well, Dr. Teagarden and I would like to come to that meeting. We'll invite ourselves.
Okay, well, you know you're always invited.
What do you see as the future for the field in the education of children with emotional behavior